Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Sunday morning. I'm Roshan Karyappa. I have Neerav Kanodra and Abhishek Paul as well here to run you through the news and events of the week that was. Neerav and Abhishek, before we get started, how are things with you guys?
All
Hey,
good.
Carrie, doing good.
Yeah, glad to have you guys on another weekly. This is the 106th weekly. And, before we get started, let's talk about the episode that we put out last week. It was pretty interesting with, Surya Kanegaonkar and Jyotsna Mehra speaking about an Indian perspective on geopolitics. This was part of our Velina's Talk series. Abhishek, did you catch the episode?
Yes, very interesting episode. They covered a very wide array of topics, starting from, let's say, the Quad to the new emerging multilateral institution like I2U2, right? And also talked a lot about China and Russia as well as Europe in terms of geopolitics, energy related equations, and so on. So, yeah, I would definitely suggest that those viewers who are interested in these topics of geopolitics to definitely check it out.
What do you think about this, Neerav?
Yeah, no, so absolutely. As in talked about, so there are like a lot of geopolitics is moving. There's a lot of moving parts right now, and so things like I2U2, which is more on a trade perspective, Quad, which is more on a defense cooperation perspective. Also mentioned things like AUKUS, Australia, UK, and the US, and compared that with like China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? So I think it's a very informative episode going into the weeds, as you would say, right? And it's very like the landscape is pretty much open, unlike pre-1990, where it was just US bloc or the USSR bloc, etc., and the very weak non-aligned bloc. I think there are a lot of new formations happening, and it is very interesting episode. Like I would recommend all listeners to go listen to it.
So, just one thing I would probably point out, which I found really fascinating, was so Surya talked about how, there is this discussion everywhere that, the world is split between, let's say, democracies and authoritarian regimes, right? And he said how it's interesting that authoritarian regimes like Russia and China find it easier to cooperate with each other rather than democratic regimes, right? Because what happens is the internal politics of these democratic countries takes over, right? So, for example, you will find it much more difficult to cooperate on things like energy because the internal politics of especially the West, like, right, where they are not so willing to even consider nuclear as a viable option, and the left of the West is totally sold on renewables and things like that, right? So things like energy cooperation also get impacted by local politics of democracies, which make it harder for democratic countries to cooperate with each other. So I thought that was a very good point brought out in this discussion.
Yeah, so we have an old friend of the podcast, Sarthak Agrawal, on the comments. He's saying monthly Sunday conundrum again, what to watch, Bharatvaarta or Man Ki Baat, right? So, well, thanks for choosing us, Sarthak. You can play both simultaneously, actually, right? I mean,
Or
so
watch a replay of one. So yeah, that's fine. You need not watch either Man Ki Baat or us live. Yeah, watch both.
yeah, both India positive. So anyway. Let's move on to the first piece of news. This was quite a storm on Twitter as well last week. The Adani Group has launched a hostile takeover of NDTV. Initially, Adani will acquire 29.18% stake in NDTV through a company called Vishwa Pradhan Commercial Private Limited, VPCL, which has lent about 400 crores to NDTV's founder promoters Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy. The notice from VCPL is based on a loan agreement it entered into with NDTV founders Radhika and Pranoy Roy in 2009-2010. Following this transaction, AMG Media Networks and Adani Enterprises will spend 492.81 crores to acquire an additional 26% stake via an open offer from the public shareholders of NDTV. If this takeover attempt succeeds, Adani will own about 55% stake in NDTV. Neerav, I mean, this has been building up, right? I mean, you can see how the stock has rallied over the last, 5 or 6 months. I think it was in the know for everyone. But I was kind of amused that a lot of veteran journalists as well were pretty surprised and shocked at the fact that this happened. So could you take us through,
Sure.
what are the mechanics of this?
Oh yeah, sure. So basically, NDTV, you can say like public holding is about 38.5%, About 61.5% is Pranoy Roy, his wife Radhika Roy, and they have a holding company called RRPR Holding. So that's RR for Radhika Roy, PR for Pranoy Roy. And RRPR had pledged the shares, 29% of NDTV, to get a loan of about 403 crores in 2009. And this was given by one company. And then Adani has later on acquired, Adani Media Group, AMG has later on acquired this company, right? And under the terms of the loan, either they have to pay up with interest for a 10-year loan, or the lender has an option to acquire these shares, right? So what has happened is, I think the shares in 2009 were worth a lot more. Now they've come down. And what Adani has done is, like, they've acquired this company, and which gave them the option to exercise the shares. And so they've chosen to exercise it, paying up, like, so whatever was worth 403 crores. And on the other side, Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy have complained that, they were not in the know, etc. Most probably they should have been, but it was not done with their consent. But the thing is that once you take a loan from someone, having pledged the shares and having given the option for them to buy, they expected that given the shares had fallen in value, that person may not acquire these shares, right? So that was an assumption which they had. But Adani, either, like, instead of starting their own new media house, chose to exercise this. And then you look at the numbers. So they 29%, 29.18 or whatever, 29%, they've acquired at 403 crores. But for the further 26%, they're giving an open offer at 294 rupees a share, which was like 20% over the prevailing market value. So which is for about 490 crores odd, right? So this is one, I think this is much more common in the West, such hostile takeovers. But this is like a attempt being made by Adani. Second thing is that there's a lot of accusation against Adani that A, they've grown too fast. B, now Adani is like the richest man in India, the richest man in Asia, and probably fifth richest in the world. So they're getting into a lot of businesses which are unrelated, etc. So I think the whole saga is very interesting. I think this also needs approval from the regulators, etc., and the competition commission and whatnot. Also, there's a lot of criticism that Adani is trying to buy influence or buy out media by investing in this media house, which has been it has been very anti-Adani, Ambani. They've been more left-leaning, they've been left of center, whereas the ruling BJP government, as well as the big business houses, as people say, that they are like more co-aligned with the ruling party. So that can be debated. So this is a way of like buying out their critics, right? So that remains interesting. Another thing I want to talk about, hostile takeovers. Like hostile takeovers, a lot of times they've happened in the West. There are a lot of times the management is very resistant to it. Sometimes the employees are very resistant. You have like one example, ongoing battle is Twitter and Elon Musk. So there are, I want to highlight like three potential things which can happen. One is the management tries to find another buyer. So that's called the white knight, right? They try to find another bidder who will bid out from, say, Adani and give a higher offer and try and like acquire the shares back, right? So that the control kind of remains with friends of, say, Pranoy Roy, Radhika Roy, right? So that is one option. Option number two is that this has to be done sometimes very much in advance, that they actually have a poison pill defense, where they say that in case management changes, then certain people need to be paid off a lot, so there are clauses in the articles of association of the company when it's formed that, and these are not known until due diligence is done, etc. Right? So there's a poison pill at times that you kind of make the company worth a lot less than what the acquirer thought it would be, right? And either they have some contracts which they have, or some advertising contracts which would lapse in case this gets acquired by a hostile takeover. The third one is actually you see that the employees, the management, etc., probably you would see the leadership, Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy, even though they have 61.5 minus 29. So yeah, that's about 32.5% between the two of them. They themselves would try and sell their shares out and try and like exit the company because they're no longer a majority stakeholder. They might have built it up from scratch, but they might choose to get out of the company and maybe build another media house on their own with the money that they've gotten, right? So these are a few things which could happen. It's very interesting. Only like word of caution, I think like hostile takeovers are a sign of like markets being at the top, because somebody's very confident that they can take over a company and still run it despite like large opposition from the ranks below. And two is that these things can take a while, right? And third thing is, we don't know whether is it cheaper to build up a whole new media house on your own, or is it just cheaper to acquire another one, right? So I think there are a lot of questions. It's a very interesting time, similar to like Twitter and Elon Musk. There has been a lot of meltdown on like social media, etc. A lot of people are looking at it from an ideological perspective. That's saying that why does a person who is not loved a lot on NDTV, right? Gautam Adani. There's a lot of jibes on the Ambani Adani. Like earlier, like people used to say Birla Tata, now it's Ambani Adani. Why is that person buying out like a media house, which is probably one of the more hostile ones to him, right? Let's see how the whole saga progresses. Abhishek, maybe
Yeah.
you could add more on like the deal is not yet done. So
Yeah, so in to add to what all you described, right? So there is an interesting defense being attempted by the NDTV promoters, who are saying that they will not be able to transfer the shares of RRPR to Adani's immediately, because what has happened is that they are right now in a 2-year period in which they have been banned by SEBI from doing any activities, right? This is because both Prannoy Roy and Radhika Roy were held to have, done some insider trading in the last decade, or maybe I think it's in the 2007, 8, or somewhere around that, where the SEBI has held them that, they had indulged in some kind of insider trading, and due to which right now they are till I think November 2000, 2022, they cannot sell any of their shares or transfer any of their shares. So this is an interesting defense that they have brought in, and they are saying that since SEBI has not cleared this sale, they will not be able to do the share transfer. The Adanis, of course, have said that there is no need of any such SEBI approval for this transaction, and this ban does not come into picture for this transaction. So that will be interesting to see what SEBI says right now. But beyond that, I think you really hit the nail on the head that in terms of the wider interest, it's more the ideological question that is more interesting, right? As to why would the Adani group want to take over NDTV, and what changes, if any, they would make in the general coverage. Obviously, there are two kinds of views. I think some have pointed out that they hold similar interests in other media like Quint, I believe. But Quint hasn't really changed their editorial position at all since that change, right? And so whether, the Adanis simply want to buy NDTV because it's a business they like and a space they want to enter. And in support of that is the financials right now that NDTV is doing quite well, right? In terms of profitability, they are pretty popular on the digital platforms as well, apart from their TV channel. So that's an argument in favor of, Adani is doing it purely as a business sort of point of view. The other view is, of course, that this is in order to, gain influence. And I think all of us will agree that at the elite levels, NDTV is sort of the New York Times / Washington Post of India. And at least it definitely represents the old idea of India, let's say, right? In terms of the Nehruvian Gandhian consensus, right? That's how NDTV has sort of positioned themselves. And for example, I think it is said that, when it comes to top bureaucrats or judges or lawyers of the country, they are very much consumers of NDTV, right? And NDTV is able to shape opinion right at the top of the food chain or pyramid in India, right? So, and definitely that used to be the case before 2014, right? And while I would say NDTV's influence in policy circles is probably diminished significantly since the Modi government has come in, but even then it kind of remains quite an influential channel. And also, I would add that Adanis now have significant business interests outside India, right? And for example, you would recall that they got really bad press for their mining interests in Australia, right? So could a channel like NDTV help them out in countering those kind of things, and outside India is also something worth looking at.
Yeah, I think a lot of controversy, but this has been this happens everywhere, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos acquiring the Washington Post, for example, right? When you get to a certain size, I think you realize that you need some leverage in the media, and this is a standard template that has been copied pretty much the world over, right? All of the media houses anywhere across the world is owned by large conglomerates or business interests. Yes, I mean, obviously this calls for a certain amount of introspection in terms of whether media is fair, biased, whatever it is. But considering that we have so many different media channels, and we have social media, of course, and alternate media and whatnot, right? I am really not so concerned in terms of, hey, I mean, will this sway narrative one way or another, right? I mean, I think there are enough people writing for and against the government at this point of time. One would argue more against the government than for, right, in the media. So yeah, I don't think those concerns are really, I mean, so valid at this point of time, right? um and of course, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business, right? I mean, hey, they took a loan and they have to obviously pay back, right, in one way or another. So what was surprising to me was, some of these journalist folks, expressing shock and awe that, hey, such a thing is happening in broad daylight, like as though, Adani just walked in there with the AK-47 and is like, bartering all of the NDTV wealth in, in broad daylight, right? I mean, it's, yeah, anyway, it's pretty absurd. Um, Moving on, the CBI has raided 16 places in connection with an alleged land for jobs scam involving former Bihar Chief Minister Lalu Prasad Yadav. During the probe, the CBI has learned that Lalu's wife, Rabri Devi, and daughter Hima Yadav were gifted land in connection with the scam by job seekers who were later appointed in the railways. The CBI registered a case against Lalu Prasad, his wife Rabri Devi, two daughters, and 15 others, including unknown public servants and private persons. About 1,05,292 square feet of land, immobile properties situated at Patna, were acquired by Yadav and his family through 5 sales deeds and 2 gift deeds. Abhishek, Mr. Yadav is back in the news after a long time for familiar reasons. So both of us are 90s kids. We remember, some of this stuff from earlier. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, so supporters of Lalu Yadav will obviously point out at the convenient timing of the news of this scam, right? Within weeks of the RJD coming to power together with Nitish Kumar in Bihar. And so this sort of continues the narrative that opposition parties have been saying, right, in recent year, let's say months, that the BJP government is basically using instruments of state like the CBI and ED to target opposition parties. Having said that, if the scam is real, then it is real, right? And it's too bad that the timing is not convenient for the new Bihar government. So as you said, the case involves the, let's call it quote unquote celebrated period of Lalu Yadav as the railway minister of India, right? And I mean, I believe even Harvard had talked about how Lalu Prasad has done wonders for the railways during his time, with bringing in things like the Kulhad, etc., to the railways. But the fact of the matter remains that government jobs and jobs in railways remain very coveted in certain places of the country, like Bihar. And it's not surprising that this kind of a scam has emerged where he was gifted or got land at discounted prices in exchange of giving, jobs to certain people. And now it's up to the CBI, which, let's put it, doesn't have a great track record in closing cases. It's up to the CBI to, take this case to the conclusion and find the people who are guilty, right? And prosecute them. So, yeah, I mean, the RJD's image of being a corrupt party doesn't seem to really impact the number of votes it seems to gather in Bihar, especially in assembly elections, because they have a very sort of dedicated vote bank or vote base. So yeah, I'm not sure if this will have too many political implications for the present government, but possibly Lalu Prasad Yadav or certain members of his family may get into trouble due to this once the case is taken to its conclusion.
Yeah, I remember the Harvard case study specifically by the Indian Railways, right? And I also remember, Lalu Prasad's speech in the parliament saying that he will produce a fruit tree which will give fruits or something of that sort, right? I mean, I think if people were to search on YouTube, they will still find that clip. It was pretty hilarious. Yeah, with I think it was Dayanidhi Maran just like falling over laughing in the background, I think. Yeah, fun times. So moving on, the Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka slammed certain remarks made by the Chinese ambassador in a strongly worded Twitter thread late on Saturday. The Indian High Commission said it noted the remarks of the Chinese ambassador. Chinese ambassador Chi Zhengong wrote in Sri Lanka media about countries to quote far or near bullying Sri Lanka. The ambassador had also observed that Sri Lanka overcame aggression from its northern neighbor 17 times. His violation of basic diplomatic etiquette may be a personal trait or reflecting a larger national attitude, the Indian mission said. Neither of this is pretty interesting. I actually saw an amazing tweet by Ruchir Sharma on this, quoting the aggression from the northern neighbor 17 times. I think he had a gif of Bhagwan Ram, right? Going to war in Lanka, right? So yeah, it was hilarious.
So I think, see the timing of this, right? So basically, India condemned China putting that spy ship, in Hambantota port. Now that is probably in response. See, like China, the way it looks at Taiwan is very different from the way India looks at Sri Lanka, right? And when Pelosi visited Taiwan, there's a lot of controversy. So now China is trying to like flex its muscles. So then it puts like a spy ship in Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. And then second thing is, this has been a recent phenomenon in amongst a lot of Chinese diplomats. It's called wolf warrior diplomacy, where they go off the rails and they say anything, which can be kind of like denied by like the Chinese authority, the government. He says he's speaking on his own accord, etc. And but they kind of say what basically the leaders want to say, but with kind of like deniability later or whatever, right? So this is the comments which they made, that basically Sri Lanka is being bullied by neighbors near or far, and it has seen aggression by its northern neighbors 17 times. So right from the time of Ram, right, till probably whatever. Yeah. So I think, see, this is what he said. So the way Indian embassy in Sri Lanka and Indian diplomats have responded. So on social media, they put out 3 tweets in 3 languages. So in English, in Tamil, which is spoken in the northern part of Sri Lanka, and Sinhala, which is spoken by the majority Sinhalese population, right? They also said 3 things. See, Sri Lanka is right now going through like a crisis. Sri Lanka is having its own economic crisis, its own political crisis, and maybe they're trying to play off their big neighbors. So not China is not exactly a neighbor, but between the two to try and get a better deal for themselves in terms of aid. Second, Sri Lanka has a lot of loans under the Belt and Road Initiative from China. They already signed off a 99-year lease on Hambantota port to the Chinese authorities. So what India has done is that they've said that, see, India has been transparent India has been helping out Sri Lanka as a neighbor, and India is not doing predatory lending with very onerous terms, right? And pointing again all these things at China. And as I said, it's done in 3 languages. It's with strong language. It's also acknowledged that this could be either done by the diplomat on his own volition, or maybe it reflects what people think about back home in China. But India has put its case quite strongly, I think. So that is quite a nice thing. Second thing is, like, for Chinese people to realize, or like Chinese diplomats as well, that India does not have any plans of reunification with Sri Lanka, right? Whether in the times of Lord Ram or now, India didn't want to go capture and take over the territory. And so I think that's another thing. So probably what China thinks with Taiwan, and I think they're drawing like false parallels, but it is what it is. It's a good thing. See, India showing some spine. Maybe India did not have as much leverage not to allow the ship to dock at all, but that is fair enough. I think some amount of spying goes along wherever you have to acknowledge it. You have to like figure out and protect yourself in either case, right? So that is what it is. I think Sri Lanka is going to remain a battleground on these between India and China, sadly. While this whole crisis is going on, both will vie for influence in the country. And yeah, so I think we might see similar small episodes, but India should keep its stand clear and communicate openly. The other good thing is, so one other observation actually. So like Twitter and a lot of other social media platforms, right? They're all banned in China. Whereas the Chinese media, so whenever all these Chinese diplomats, so while this was not on Twitter, but you've got like the Global Times, which is the mouthpiece of the Communist Party, their spokesperson, Hu, Xijin, etc. Whenever they put things out on Twitter, or when they put these things out, right, it is aimed more at a global audience, an audience outside China, right? So that's another thing to note. So similarly, like whatever Indian diplomats have said, probably I don't know whether it's done or no, but it needs to be also communicated in Mandarin on Weibo and other platforms. Probably it gets blocked there locally, but that's the other thing. But it's good that India has kind of like held its own ground, and it has called out for what it was. That this was violation of diplomatic etiquette. There's no need for one country to talk about the affairs between two other countries. So I think that's what it is. If China has any issues with Sri Lanka, should take it to Sri Lanka directly. China has any issues with India, should take up with India directly, right? So what India and Sri Lanka do between them is a bilateral thing. So yeah, that's a good thing, and I guess we'll see more and more of this.
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, I was saying one thing is for sure. I mean, I think over the last couple of years, geopolitics has become super interesting, right? I mean, even someone who was a passive observer is getting sucked into, you know, the various twists and turns. Yeah, for sure. Moving on, bit of a political hot potato for Congress. Jammu and Kashmir minister, or former minister, I should say, Ghulam Nabi Azad has left the Congress in a bombshell move. He wrote a 5-page letter to party chief Sonia Gandhi, blaming Rahul Gandhi for the downfall of Congress. He called him, and to quote, immature and a non-serious person surrounded by a coterie of sycophants. Wow. Mr. Azad said that he will float his own political outfit with its first unit in J&K in views of the impending polls there. Though Mr. Azad may have ruled out joining BJP for now, both sides have dropped plenty of hints in the past about a possible alliance in the future. Abhishek, this is, well, I mean, it's a very strongly worded letter, right? I mean, I don't think it's any room for reconciliation, right? But do you think that Mr. Azad may, you know, step over to the BJP side, or will for sure ally with the BJP in elections there?
So, XYZ political leader leaves Congress is now a recurring theme for our weeklies, right? So we've had Hardik Patel, Ashwini Kumar, RPN Singh, Sunil Jakad, Kapil Sibal, and just in this last week, Mr. Azad, as well as another politician spokesperson called Javeer Shergill, who left the Congress, or at least he's resigned from his spokesmanship. And basically, the common theme in all this is that they find that the Congress top leadership, some people mention Rahul Gandhi by name, some don't, but they keep it, make sure that the hint is clear that how Rahul Gandhi is running the party is not very transparent. It's not dynamic enough as an electoral force. He's surrounded by yes men and sycophants who guide him in a certain way and do not take the advice and wisdom of experienced leaders like Ghulam Nabi Azad. So yeah, I mean, nothing really is surprising here. I think the Congress party with Rahul Gandhi at the helm has taken a certain direction, which is, I would call it pretty hard left. And the perception in the common, let's say the middle classes of India or the general public is not very favorable towards that direction right now. And it's also not very geared towards electoral politics right now, right? It's sort of, you could almost say that it is playing more towards a Western audience, right? Sort of. So the criticisms of what op-ed columnists from Western publications do is same as pretty much the criticisms that Rahul Gandhi or his group within the Congress generally spouts in the media, right? So they'll talk about North-South divide, they talk about Hindi imposition, they talk about federalism and these kind of things, right? And so I'm not sure how much that is gaining traction within the public, but the fact remains that Congress only rules 2 states right now, and they are pretty much at a very low level, right, in terms of their overall trajectory, in terms of seats won in Lok Sabha or the state assemblies, right? And so I would say that there is definitely a lot of weightage to be given to the criticism by people like Ghulam Nabi Azad, who have been loyal Congress members for a very long time. As to the future, as you said, he is right now said that uh, he will form his own political party, but I think it's a reasonable estimate to make that he'll probably ally with the BJP, maybe pre-poll, maybe post-poll, whenever elections happen there. But yeah, I think we'll all recall his last day in Rajya Sabha had very emotional speeches from various people, including Prime Minister Modi, right, who complimented him for how supportive he was during that accident which involved tourists from Gujarat, right? So yeah, uh, um, there is definitely a possibility that his outfit will ally with the BJP in the future.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely share a very good relationship, right? Prime Minister Modi and Mr. Assad. During his farewell, I think Mr. Modi had called Mr. Azad a true friend, right? Lauding him for very high standards as an MP and opposition leader as well. Yeah.
And
Right.
also a couple of things, like he is one of the few Congress leaders who got a Padma Award from this
Right.
under this
Yeah.
government. So much so that post his leaving Congress, people like Jairam Ramesh said that his DNA has got modified. So I mean, they really find it hard to sort of digest these things.
Yeah. No, I'm also reminded of this one line Harsh Gupta, who's a friend, said in that debate with Mr. Shashi Tharoor, right? The Business Today Summit. He said, India has not left Congress, but the Congress has left India. And I think that's kind of true. I mean, whatever it is the Congress party talks about today, I mean, it doesn't mirror the aspirations or the reality of Indians, really, right? And cause for a lot of introspection from there and for sure, right? By the way, if you haven't checked out the debate, I encourage everyone to absolutely check it out. It was on the idea of India, and Harsh is, as you guys know, really, really articulate, but this was special even by his standards, right? Um, Props to Mr. Tharoor for actually, wanting to debate folks on the other end of the
So
spectrum.
yeah, I would say definitely this is probably the best TV / whatever YouTube debate in recent months that has come out, right? And yeah, I mean, Shashi Tharoor, he's sort of caught in a bind, right? Because it almost seems that he's always balancing what he should say as an intellectual and as a congressman, and oftentimes they are at conflict with each other. So yeah, tough spot for him, but he deserves props for being game enough to at least appear in
Yeah.
such debates. Yeah.
No, he's done this in the past as well, right? I mean, he is
Yeah.
spoken to Vikram Sampath, Jay Sai Deepak, and they haven't really been. I mean, they've really given it as good as it gets, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah. Well, on the geopolitics front, India and Argentina have decided to enhance cooperation in the defense sector. Uh, During External Affairs Minister Mr. S. Jayashankar's two-day visit to Argentina, he reviewed the ongoing cooperation in the strategic sectors of defense, nuclear energy, and space. Mr. Jayashankar and Foreign Minister Cafiero jointly presided over a joint commission meeting, JCM, between the two countries. During the visit, Mr. Jayashankar also called on Argentine President Dr. Alberto Fernandez. Um, Nirav, what do you see as the areas of overlap between India and Argentina?
So actually, basically, one is while Argentina has shown interest, right? Argentina as a country has been a serial defaulter on debt. So we should not get too excited about this part. I don't. So Argentina is like a remote country, shares borders just with like Uruguay, Paraguay, and like Brazil and Chile. And all of them are like reasonably friendly to each other. There's not that much hostility. But what this is good thing is it's a signal. So it's a signal that India has developed a world-class fighter aircraft called Tejas. Second thing is maybe Argentina, hopefully the first of many. So India has grown quite a bit in GDP. Its defense expenditure has grown, but India was reliant on a lot of foreign imports, right? And so maybe there are different classes of fighter jets, generation whatever 3, 4, 5, 6 is like I think 5th generation aircraft is what like the US has, but so F-35s etc. But like even the older generation aircraft or like which are not the most advanced, they probably can do a good enough job, right? You need not want the best equipment, or as like in the Top Gun movie, they say it's the pilot and not the plane, right? So that's one thing. Second thing is now India having large requirements for its own defense things. It can be a good exporter, and probably India comes in with fewer strings attached. I think right now doing business with USSR could anger your Western partners. Your Western partners, if they give you, probably it costs a lot more and they ask for their pound of flesh. China has been very famous for its own kind of like onerous terms, which like Sri Lanka is realizing now, right? So here, potentially, this is India has to step in and get into the defense exports business as well. We are importing a lot. Maybe we can export some of our things as well, right? So that's a very positive development. I think there has been talk about the BrahMos missile and Vietnam being interested in some of those things. There's been talk about like Tejas aircraft also like with Vietnam, but like there hasn't been any concrete deal signed. So what I'm saying is while it's a very positive news, it's too soon to say anything. And let's not count like chickens before they hatch, right? But yeah, it's definitely like a positive development and hopefully first of many.
So I would just point out that, typically Tejas, which is an LCA, right, light combat aircraft, is in competition with the joint Pakistani-Chinese JF-17, right? And that is also an aircraft which Argentina has been considering in the past. I would say that, in fact, that the JF-17 is probably the best area of cooperation that China and Pakistan have done, right? And that's also an aircraft which has got, purchased by various let's say, lower or middle income countries, right? Like Nigeria and places like that. So yeah, that it's probably as you said, a signal, right? That the more interest Tejas garners from various nations, the better it is for its commercial prospects. Right?
All right. On that positive note, we come to the end of the weekly for this week. We have another couple of great episodes coming up. I had a chance to talk to Ashish, who is an old friend of Bharatvaarta. He's the counselor for the permanent mission of India to the WTO, and we spoke about how trade is important for India and where we stand right now. What are those strategic initiatives that will really help us in the Amrit Kal, right? So again, wonderful discussion, very thorough and very comprehensive. You guys have heard Ashish plenty of times, famous for politics, policy, and poha. We decided to focus more on the policy element in this episode. Although we did talk about a little bit of poha at the end, right? So we also have the scientist and author Professor Gautam Desiraju on the podcast this week. We'll be recording it on Friday or Saturday. Professor Desiraju is one of the most highly cited scientists out of India, and this should be a very interesting discussion on his new book, Bharat, which is India 2.0. All right. That's about it from us. Please don't forget to rate and review us on podcast platforms, like and subscribe on YouTube, etc. Help the algorithms recognize the good content, right? And look forward to your support. So thanks for joining us from Abhishek, Nirav, and myself. Thank you again. Take care, stay safe, and Jai Hind. Thank you.